Hello, friends. This is Deborah Dudak. Thank you so much for joining me for a free live webinar. A little bit of a different session today, a little different from my typical World War I genealogy webinar, because we are going to focus a lot more on some of the stuff that you can do right away, right now from home, because I know a lot of people are going to be coming into this webinar from a lot of different experiences, a lot of different technology levels, and I want to make sure everybody feels confident, comfortable, and ready to do any type of research that they want to do. Everybody is welcome here as far as your experience. You don't have to have a ton of it. You can have a lot, you can have a little, doesn't matter. You're welcome here. I want you in on this World War I genealogy research train. So my name is Deborah Dudak. If you've not been to any of my webinars or any of my live sessions, hello, I'm super happy that you're here. If you're a returning friend, welcome back. Always love to have you in the audience. Remember that you can see a full schedule of my events and any sort of activities, programs, free webinars. You can check those out on my website. And then you can contact me anytime by email. So it might take a day or two for me to respond, but I promise I read all of them, even if the ones don't exactly shake out the way I want them to. Your feedback is always welcome here. So what we're going to do this evening, just as a reminder, that the proof copy of the World War I genealogy research guide, which was available to our friends who'd signed up for the live session, and the webinar presentation today is copyright protected. So please do not screenshot, please do not share the proof copy of the book. I will have it available later, and I will talk a little bit about that at the end of the presentation, where you can purchase a copy, or I promise you they are not going to be expensive. They're dirt cheap, because I want as many people as possible to utilize the records and resources to find their World War I ancestors. Now, I thought this was at the end, but I guess I put it at the beginning. So because we are celebrating the first illumination of the National World War I Monument in Washington, D.C., Friday, September 13th, that's when the paperback copy of this new guide will be available on Amazon. It will be available on Kindle also on the same day. And then the EPUB version, which is available for your Nook or Hoopla or through a couple other different vendors, that's going to be coming late September. So my goal was to get the paperback done first, then the Kindle, and then the EPUB. So if you have any questions about that, I will be posting updates on my page. So let's talk about what you need to get started, because I know there's going to be a lot of different folks in the audience who are coming at this from a lot of different experience levels. So if you are one of those people who does not have a lot of information, the article or the area on the left is for you. I don't know, or I don't have very much information. At the very least, you're going to need the following details: the name of the person you're researching, that's always helpful, and their immediate family members. So mom, dad, brothers, sisters, that's going to be great. The date of birth and their location of birth. An estimate's okay, exact is better, same thing for death. And then a list of places of residence. You don't have to have every single year, but just a roundabout idea of where they would have been at a certain time period. And then their branch of service. Now, if you are coming into this classroom today and you have some or a lot of information, I want you to use everything in the red column plus some of the information that maybe you've already found. So military service numbers or serial numbers, enlistment, discharge dates, rank, company, division, unit, regiment information, list of any sorts of documents that you have, photos. I want to make sure that you write it all down. You document precisely what you have, any sort of transcripts or oral histories or a written account of what you know. And if you're looking to be that student, the Hermione Granger of this class today, timeline all of that, because that's going to be very, very helpful going forward. Now, as a public librarian, I do not want to see people spending a lot of money and a tight budget. I understand what that's like. I am encouraging you to go to your local public library and to a local family search center and to lean on the free databases that they have. I don't want you to go out and spend a lot of money on a database you're only going to use for a short period of time. I want you to use the stuff at your local library. I do have a caveat to that, which is family search. Family search is always free. You can use this from home. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in your bunny slippers. There are certain record sets which are outlined in the guide that you cannot access from home. You'll have to be in a family search center, but that's a whole nother conversation. My Experienced genealogists will know this. However, if you're a new person coming into this, it's okay. Sign up for Family Search. It's completely free. You can use it as much or as little as you want, so it's not going to cost you a dime. If you are joining this session today and you are either an active member of the military or retired member of the military, you can access Ancestry and Fold3 for free from home. You do need to go to the Department of Defense. It's the Office of Morale, and they have a website that you can log on to. You have to register in advance, but you can get into the site once you're registered, and you can access Ancestry and Fold3 from home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you know somebody or you are somebody who would qualify for this perk, please use it. They want you to use this resource. They want the stats. So please, please lean on that and save yourself a little bit of money. Now, if you are an experienced genealogist, or you're somebody who was maybe helping out on a family history project once upon a time, and someone told you, or you heard through the grapevine, or you read this in a newspaper, that all of America's World War I records burned. All right, that's a very broad generalization. So let me explain. This is the elephant in the room when we talk about what records are available, because when people hear all the records burned, they just think World War I done, it's toast, we're never going to find out anything. And that's patently not true. So while there was upwards of about 80% of record loss at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, Spanish Lake to be more exact, for Army and Air Force, and I believe part of the Coast Guard as well, all of the US Navy and Marine records were stored separately and are available to researchers. And in the guide, it outlines specifically how you can research those records and how you can request them. Now, there are records that have survived. So we're all going to look at the low-hanging fruit in this presentation today of what you can get right now, today, no waiting. You're going to get success right now. Now, for some of the other stuff that you would have to send away for, we will cover that in other types of lectures that I have. But for this session today, we're going to talk about everything you can get online right now. So our roadmap for today looks like this. We're going to go through part 1, which is our online searches. Then we're going to go for anybody and everybody can use these. I have 4 steps that will get you the vital information that you need. You can get it probably in under an hour. Part 2 is going to go into the intermediate work. Now, if you have some genealogy experience, this is going to be, some of that might be things you've used before. Some of these resources might be new, and then other ones might be a little bit of a challenge. But I'm going to put that out there because this is how you're going to fill out that timeline of that extra credit that I put forward to you earlier in this session. In part 3, we're going to talk a little bit about what might be online. And those are state and local resources, which everybody bypasses thinking, oh, the federal records are gone. Doesn't really matter what's at the state and local level. Wrong. There is a lot of stuff at the state and local level. And we're just going to run through them. We're not going to do a whole lot, but we're just going to run through it. More of those are in the guide. And then in part 4, we're going to talk a little bit about non-combatant records. And I do have some very specific records that you can do right now online and start finding those individuals. So a quick note about women's World War I service files, because some people think, oh, it's a separate file or it's a separate record set. No, we have World War I records, military records for women. And surprisingly, this is what's going to be the big one, Navy and Marines, all of those records are perfectly fine. That's great. The caveat that we have an issue with is women who served in the Army. Now, there was a bit of a logistical hop step when it came to women who served in the Army, and sometimes very specifically for the women who worked in the Signal Corps as the telephone operators, the hello girls, if you will. They were not the only women in the Army who were kind of brushed to the side and were told they were civilian contractors. But that would finally change in the late 1970s when Jimmy Carter signed an Additional Support Act so they could get the recognition that they deserved. So most of their records at that time period were not necessarily kept in the same areas. or they weren't even created in the first place because they were considered civilian contractors, which is why we need to talk about that just a little bit. There are certain things, there are certain record sets that have existed. A lot of them are not online, but I at least want to put that bug in your ear. So I always tell people to start with what you know, and it's okay to have a lot of question marks. A part of this process is about gaining confidence, finding the approachable records you can get right now within this first hour. So if you have a family story about my grandpa, my great grandpa was an ambulance driver in France, or his brother, I know he was really active in the American Legion post and he has a World War I headstone. Or maybe I've got this really great photograph of somebody and it looks like he's in a military uniform. I'm just not sure if he served in the First World War. All of that is welcome, but go ahead and write it down. Write it down, write down everything you know, who told you, when, and then we're going to start getting to work. Now, occasionally you're going to come across things that this is just me being the Hermione Granger of this exercise today. But if you find a newspaper article, you might go through a family Bible, you might go through a bunch of books, you might go through somebody's personal papers at some point, and you might find some newspaper articles. Break them down and make a timeline of what you've learned from this document and how you can expand. Now, I'm using this very, very specific, just a piece of scrap newspaper that was in a book, but I was able to gain a lot of information from it. You do not have to go in this strong of a detail, but this is just an example of what you can do with the papers that you have. Now, if you don't have anything, and I'm going to be very, very honest, I had very little when I first started out, other than a family story of Grandpa Rhodes was an ambulance driver. That was it. I didn't have any photographs. I didn't have any articles. I didn't have anything else. I just went to other relatives and asked what they had. So some of the things that I do have now that are in this presentation, I had to go and ask for it. But we had nice family reunions before COVID, so it worked out well. If you absolutely do not have anything, I mean, literal, and maybe your family doesn't like you. Maybe they hate you. Maybe you all got into an argument over some black market beagles one day. It doesn't matter. If you have absolutely nothing, I want you to take the little scrap piece of paper that you were writing down that was everything in that red block that we saw on one of our earlier slides. I want you to make sure that you have this following information. Make sure you have the veteran's name, their roundabout date of birth, their roundabout date of death, where they were born, and maybe one of their addresses. And I want you to go to Family Search, to the Veterans Administration Master Index file, and type in their information. It looks just like this. And middle name is nice, but it's not always needed. Sometimes people just used a middle initial. Sometimes they didn't use the middle initial. Maybe it's a totally incorrect middle initial because people make mistakes, but it should take you to something that looks like this. So this is all of your search results from that first page. And notice right up at the top, I've got a George Allen Rhodes, which meets most of the criteria that I need. The birth dates around about correctly. The death date I didn't really know about, but the residence is spot on because Concord, Michigan, there's only one George in Concord, Michigan. So there we are. When I click on this listing, it's going to give me a very short, very brief snapshot of his service. And it gives us the vital records that we need to start going with where we're going to go forward. So it gives me his name. It gives me his rank and unit information, his military service number, serial number, which is going to follow him around like a social security number through a lot of his records, his enlistment date and his discharge date. And then it also gives me all of these other wonderful codes over on the right-hand side. Now, there's a whole nother presentation I can talk to you about that chronicles what exactly all those numbers are. But for the sake of this presentation today, this is what we're looking for. All of this information is going to help you move forward, specifically that rank and unit information, service number, enlistment, discharge date. All of this is going to be great. This is what we're going to use. We're going to go to Ancestry after this point. So once we have our Veterans Administration Master Index card that anybody can do from any computer anywhere in the world, if you get that card, you can then go to Ancestry. Again, if you do not have a private Ancestry subscription, lean on the ones that you can get from the library or from a family search center. So these are the top 4 must-use resources if they apply to you. Now, a majority of your ancestors from the First World War served in the Army. However, there's another sizable portion of the population that served in the Navy and then again in the Marines. So we don't want to discount any of those groups. But what the first place that we're going to go is the headstone application files, which used to kind of only go through the 1960s. Now they're up to 1983. But anything after 1973 can kind of be a mystery because of that National Personnel Record Center fire that we talked about earlier in the session. But this headstone application, they're fantastic. Not only are we able to find the name of our veteran, we have all of that other information that we found earlier, that this is our guy. We have his serial number. We have his enlistment date, the discharge date, date of birth, all of this other stuff. Notice that there are red check marks next to all of this information because the person who's filling out this card is not the veteran. It's typically their next of kin, their spouse, a family member, or a designee. And every time you see this red check mark, that meant that the application was checked against their original military file. Even though that sucker could be toast, it doesn't matter. At the time that it was created, before 1973, they would have gone through and red check marked everything. And notice in the middle of this, where it says branch of services under number 9, there's a big swath of red writing. And notice that the typed information on there was what the designee, or in this case, my great-grandma, had provided on the headstone application. But the guy from the National Archives is saying, he didn't serve in the demolition group. He served in the repair unit of the Motor Transport Corps, and he corrected it. We know it's in red because we know it was corrected. So all of the other information was correct against the original file. This is great because then we know all of this information is correct. Another place we're going to go is to Army transport lists. And there's a couple of things I want to put into this section as well. I tried to do a whole thing on non-combatants, and you guys were going to be here till like 10 o'clock at night. So we're going to streamline this. Transport lists, if your ancestors served abroad. Now, don't just think France, think Russia, think the Panama Canal Zone, think the Dominican Republic, right? We have personnel that are going all over the world to fight in this world war or to be stationed in a certain situation. So we want to keep that in mind. We're using an example here. It includes the name of the passenger. So it's not just a military personnel. It could be somebody like a nurse or someone from a religious order or the YMCA or the Salvation Army. If your ancestor is in a non-military, non-personnel situation, that their organization that they may be working for, YMCA, Salvation Army, is purchasing their passage on these military ships. So you can still find them. There's information still going to be the same as somebody who's serving in uniform. So I've got an example here of Zoe McCabe. She's a nurse, and it lists her information of just like, oh, here's a replacement nurse with the with the Army Nursing Corps, her next of kin, and then the next of kin's address. This is in case the ship goes down. So that's an important bit. So in case the ship went down or something happened to this person while they were in transit, they would have a next of kin in which to notify, something that was very, very essential. Now, how about the return journey? Because we do want to talk about that. This is another caveat. So if your ancestors going there and back again, they're going to have 2 listings, and outbound going to Europe, Russia, Panama Canal, doesn't matter, going out, and then another one coming back. Now, the caveat to this is if they die while in service and they are buried in Europe or Russia or the Panama Canal Zone, wherever, then they will only have one journey, which is there. They could be repatriated, and this was entirely possible. Their family could request that they were brought home to be buried privately, whether in a national cemetery or a family cemetery. Then they would be disinterred and brought back to the United States. So you will see that within those listings. So in that case, you will have one going there, one coming back. It's kind of awkward sometimes because in many cases, it's several years later, well after the war, into the mid-1920s. So just be aware of that. But for the instance of this presentation today, we're going to put ourselves in a situation of Edward Spitzbarth, because he has a great name, Spitzbarth. And we're going to see that his inbound trajectory here, his inbound passenger list, lists not only the name of the ship that he's on, which is the Great Northern, but it also is listing to his next camp. So he's going right from the pier in Hoboken, he's getting on a train and going to Camp Merritt. And Camp Merritt is nearby, and that's probably where he's going to go to either be discharged or sent on to another camp to be discharged, because the Army wants to discharge these people as quickly as possible to get them off the payroll. We need to save money. So we're going to get people out into the world on that train, off their payroll. They don't have to worry about them again. Now, this is where we can start going into some of the fun stuff. I know people will say, well, I'm not sure about how confident I would be working with a National Archives catalog, but I'm going to give you an example here. So many of these transportation ships or transport ships that are used to bring people to and from France, Russia, the Panama Canal Zone, the Dominican Republic, wherever, not just the ships, but also the naval vessels, for example, they're going to have photographs. You're going to find a very large collection of photographs at the National Archives. So I used Edward Spitzbar's example of the Great Northern, and I just typed that into the National Archives catalog. I did filter it by decade, so 1910 to 1919, and then I only wanted to see photographs, which is what this is here. And I did get a ton of different items. Now, some of which provided the Great Northern Railway, which isn't something I necessarily needed, but it did provide two very nice photos of the Great Northern. One was taken probably a little bit before the war. It just says 1917. So it's possible the Great Northern was taking a group of people to from Honolulu back to the United States, entirely possible. The other one is a group of US Army athletes leaving to take part in the Inter-Allied Games in 1919. And there were a slew of photos of them getting on the ship, leaving the ship, putting their stuff on board, a lot of really great stuff. So those typically will have dates attached to them. So if you know your ancestor came aboard the Great Northern on a certain day, on a certain for a certain run, then you might be able to catch them at that time and find these really nice shots. Maybe your ancestors in the crowd. So another good tidbit. So we're going to leave the National Archives catalog and that nice little fun, bright, shiny genealogical item. And we're going to run into family searches, muster rolls, and roster files. Again, family search is completely free. Does not cost anything. You can register for it online quickly and easily, and then use this. Now, muster rolls and roster files, if you're an experienced genealogist, maybe you use these a lot when you're doing Civil War research. The ones for World War I are interesting because they give the early versions, I would say the early versions, the earlier muster rolls will have really great information. As we get later into 1918, I want to say about February 1918, they start to become more standardized, very, very compact, probably to save on paper and probably to save on time. So when you get into the family search area and you can search for your ancestor. So remember, we already have so much information. We have their name, we have their serial number, we know what unit or regiment that they're in. We can go through and start digging into these muster rolls. They're great because I think it was twice a month. Some just did it once a month, but some typically it would be twice a month. Muster rolls were produced. They were to give an account of everybody who's there on that one specific day, time, and what they're doing. So for an example, I've got here, this is the 86th Aerial Squadron, and they're in Garden City, Long Island from December 31st, 1917 to February 28th, 1918. So they're doing some training. This happens to be that early muster roll, again, that early period. We have the name of the veteran. So Uncle Frank, he's back. Hello. We have his enlistment date. And then we have these wonderful notes that he transferred from this provisional unit at Scott Field into the 86th Aerial Squadron. But notice on this page, it gives us a lot of other Easter eggs. So in the green boxes are a couple other guys that Uncle Frank served with in that provisional company that came over with him to the 86th Aerial Squadron. Those descendants of those guys are my new best friends because they're going to have possibly photographs, possibly letters. They might have funny stories, whatever it takes. That these people are now a great connection to Uncle Frank. Notice the dude in blue though, Jesse Reed. I don't want to call out and talk smack about people, but he went AWOL, and it talks about how he actually had to be court-martialed and what he had to do. So you will find some really interesting stuff in these muster rolls and roster files. As we get later into 1918 and 1919, again, they become very, very compact. They go from less chatty, more of like, okay, here's who's here, here's who's in sick, here who was dropped from the rolls, but they will still include an area on the last page, the front page and the last page, which will talk exactly where they are when this report is made. So I've got an example here of an advanced air service depot near, I think it's Bihon, in France. So you can do a quick Google search and find out exactly where that location is. There's also some really nice websites that talk about former American posts or former American service depots or flight depots, and where they would be. And then sometimes the locals have them kind of chart it out. So it's an interesting place to go that you can still retrace some of these steps, even from Google Earth. You don't have to leave home to do that. So by this point in your research, just within these 4 steps, not only do we have fantastic information from a headstone application and a Veterans Administration index card and an Army transport list, plus pictures of the ships, plus what they're doing every month as far as where they are, where they're located, who they're serving with. We have a whole bunch of brand new friends. Now we can start either amending or adding more information to that story. So when we talk about somebody saying, oh, they were an ambulance driver, well, it sounds like from what we're seeing here, he repaired trucks and drove them for the Motor Transport Corps. So who's to say that he didn't often sometimes just have to drive something that was maybe filled with injured people? That could possibly make sense, but it starts to give us correct and accurate information, which is what we're looking for. Now, for our new people who are here, I don't want you to be scared. I want you to take a deep breath with me. Come on, you can do it. Feeling really good about this. All of this stuff is online. I want to anticipate. I want you to see the excitement that's going to grow in my face as we get into this. Now, for my experienced people, my experienced genealogists, maybe you've used these, but even you're a little unsure about how you're going to approach them. Or maybe you've tried to use them and it was super confusing. That's okay. That's what we're here for right now. I want to take you all to the U.S. morning reports. Now, these are great because they're on fold 3. Not everybody likes fold 3. I have a whole nother session on how to navigate fold 3. Fold 3 is great because they've been working in conjunction with the National Archives to make all of these U.S. morning reports free and open to the public. So they're free forever and ever. Amen. And just like we talked about earlier, that your ancestor doesn't necessarily have to be in France serving during World War I. They can be in Panama Canal. They can be a little bit before that, prologue, Mexican border war, the occupation, the Dominican Republic, that one time we tried to show the world that we can kind of take over another country with no consequences. Yeah, we tried to do that during World War I, and it didn't work out too terribly well. So the Senate hearings from that were absolutely hilarious. But if you're not used to using these, or you don't know what they are, they're a dear diary of what happened today. Now, this is typically filled out by a commanding officer, and every commanding officer is different. Some people are super chatty. They only want to talk about the gossip. Some people talk about where we're going, what we're doing, and that's it. Other people are like train conductors. They will tell you the time, the name, every single thing. So everyone is different when you go through these morning reports. They are handwritten. Now, I know some people would say, well, I can't read old handwriting very well. That's fair. But even I was able to pick through it. What makes these records so very, very compelling, and again, it depends on the commanding officer who's filling them out, but you can find out things like special trainings. You can find out about court martials. You can find out about when somebody died or the circumstances of how somebody died. You can find out who won the 3-legged race at the rest camp fair. You can do that. And you can find things like when somebody was sent to the hospital, how long they maybe had been sick in their quarters, because we're also talking about the flu pandemic, and then when somebody went on furlough and for how long and from where. So I've got an example here. This is for Grandpa Rhodes's 303 Motor Transport Corps, and we see for the 1st of November, it says, I'm sending Corporal Ketchenbaum, Private Brinker, Private Furinaw, Private Rose, Private Rathburn, on and on and on. And he says, from duty to absent with leave, in St. Malo from 6:30 a.m. So he had a 2-week furlough that started November 1st and went till November 14th. The armistice was signed for went into effect November 11th. So he would have actually been in St. Malo rest camp on Armistice Day. And that would have been, I don't even know what kind of party. I've still been doing researching, and they've just been saying, oh, the girls were kissing everybody and everybody was in the street and celebrating and crying, all this. So it's really interesting to see that your ancestors at a certain place at a certain time where they would have been free to sleep in, have breakfast in bed, have a proper bed for once, have a nice shower, whatever it is, and then go out and celebrate this armistice, which is kind of cool. Now, if you're having problems locating morning reports, it's important to work your way back to find the earliest entry for your ancestor, because they're going to start when whatever unit information is available for your ancestor. And if they're moving units or they're moving regiments or vice versa, that could also be an issue, because your ancestors' rank, unit, regiment information could change up to 6 times depending on what type of service they're providing. So for the example of the 303 Motor Transport Corps, which was kind of ripped apart, but it was delegated into separate types of group A, B, C, D, E. And then groups A and B were in one location, C and D were in another location. You'd have to look for that transfer. But if I'm looking at the Motor Transport Corps, the first listing that I would be looking for is the first time I see them getting on that ship to go to France, or that first time they're going to Russia. And I find that in that first Army transport list we saw earlier. So he's listed underneath the Quartermaster Corps, a provisional company of the Quartermaster Corps, under the Mechanical Repair Shop Unit 303. And if I can go to that listing in Fold 3, and they will have those listings by individual unit or regiment information, then they'll go through that. And you can start with the Mechanical Repair Shop Unit 303, and then that's what you're going to follow, and you're going to go through all that paperwork. Now, AI, on the bright side, AI might change this. AI might come in and start identifying some of that old handwriting and might be able to make some sort of heads and tails of it, and as well as having a nice transcription. But we're not there yet. But it is worth the legwork if you have the time. If you don't, understandable, and you just want to stick with what we saw earlier, that's fair. But it's still here in case you're really in it to win it. Now, Fold 3 also has free World War I panoramic photos. And I like to point these out because people, A, like photos, but B, Fold 3 did a really fantastic job of digitizing not only the front of the photo, but also the back of the photo as well. And in a lot of these, you'll see like the base hospital number 29, they will have the names of everybody who's in that photograph and what line they're in. So they just go line 1, left to right, so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so, and they will write everybody's name on the back of that. So again, very, very good. And when we talk about those provisional companies, like what we saw a little bit earlier, so the training company that somebody's coming up in, you'll still find photographs of those, because sort of like their high school class before they're dispersed off into federal service. So you will find these provisional companies. So maybe you had a group of people all in the same provisional company, and then they all disperse from there. You can find some photographs there. Now, this is extra credit. I wouldn't say extra credit, but this may not apply to everybody. I do want to have a small moment of talking about how enlisting in the military helps to make people American citizens. Because at the time that America enters the First World War, we are drafting, the United States is drafting men from the ages of 21 to about 40, and then they will extend it up to 18 to 45, and regardless of citizenship status. So what we've got here is we have up to between a quarter and a third of the people who are being drafted for military service are all from a different country. And the United States is kind of like, it's not that great for us to send a bunch of people who are not Americans to go fight our war against countries that they possibly are from. So they had a system that when you entered the military, and after they had a couple acts of Congress to kind of work this all out, it was no longer a waiting period to become an American citizen. You would fill out your first and second papers, or your declaration of intent, and then your final papers. And typically your commanding officer would be the one who's signing at the bottom. And they would round these guys up. They would either have the judge come to the camp, or they would take the guys to the courthouse. They would all raise their right hand, become American citizens, and they could do it in a day. So it's an interesting bit because people will often say, well, I can't find my ancestors' naturalization. It's possibly because they become American citizens while they're serving in the military. And there's a fantastic collection of records called military petitions that are available on Family Search. So this is an example of one. I've got this kid, Francisco Along. Now I picked on him specifically because his daughter came to my genealogy club, and she asked this very same question. She says he should be naturalized in Chicago because he lived in Chicago. I said, no, let's go check to see if he served in World War I, and he did. So we were able to find through those muster rolls, we were able to find that he was at Camp Upton. When we go through the records of Camp Upton, here's his petition for naturalization and his final papers. So he actually declares that he filled out his first paper in Woodstock, Illinois, which is way north, if you know where that is. And then he had these second papers, or this final petition, filed at Camp Upton in New York, a totally different place from where she would have anticipated it. So I like to bring that out as being an option. Now, if you don't know where your ancestors' court would have been, or a roundabout place where they are, there's a great map from the Yana and Marty Davis map collection online. The link is here. It's also in the guide, or it should be in the guide. And if not, I can just send it to you. So it will say, okay, if I'm at Camp Jackson or I'm in Camp Wadsworth, it at least will give you a location of where that person was and then what the closest camp would be. So there's also all of this item, again, not searchable, but they're online, so you can browse through it, which makes a lot of sense. Now, this is where things actually get easier. And maybe I should have started off with this, but some people they've got a goal. But this is way easier stuff. These are county and state honor books, which are available online. These are going to be in a lot of places. They're going to be on Google Books. They're going to be on HathiTrust. They're going to be on Internet Archive. So if you're new to this research, those are 3 websites which are free and open to the public. They do not cost anything. And when you go through these honor books, which you'll search just honor book. So if you're in Lee County, Missouri, then you'll type in Lee County, Missouri honor book and see if there's any search results, because they were compiled by the county historical commissions that were part of the war councils. So every county had a war historian, and it was their job to go around and to collect photographs and little snippets of someone's military service, men, women, but also of people who were serving in a support system. So the canteen workers for the Red Cross, or the 4 Minutemen who were going around giving patriotic speeches, or the Red Cross, or the Ladies Auxiliary on food conservation, whatever that is, they're going to end up in these honor books. So this is another one of those twofers. We can find military personnel, but we can also find the larger community that's a part of this. And these books, again, you can find not only photographs, but you can find a lot of information about where they are, when they came back, what ship they were on, but also additional details of their volunteer service, which is great because women's free labor often goes unacknowledged. This is like a whole new thing with World War I research. We're finding more and more about the women who are spending their time not getting paid and going out and doing this volunteer work for the war. Now, Internet Archive also has a book called Soldiers of the Great War, and this is primarily for men and women who had either passed away during service or suffered grievous injuries or were missing in action. This book is free on Internet Archive. Yes, it is available on Ancestry, but I've noticed the search optimization is not the greatest, but it is free on Internet Archive. And what's nice is that it not only includes the names of as many as they could at that time without modern databases to collect as many names of the deceased and missing in action as possible, but they also tried to collect as many photographs as possible. Now, the photographs are not in any particular order, and when you do the searches, sometimes the photographs don't even show up, but it is worth scrolling through them. So if you know of somebody who died in service, this is a good place to possibly go get a photograph. Now, another free place to get free photographs is the Library of Congress. Now, I know we talk a lot about National Archives, and they're great. They're fantastic. I love everything that they do. The Library of Congress also has an exceptionally large photo archive and collection, and it does include World War I materials. So remember that handsome man that we saw earlier, Grandpa Rhodes? He kind of looks like he has that Art Garfunkel hair underneath that hat. He's a handsome lad. He was in a motor transport repair shop. And I wanted to see, okay, if they've got any photographs, but they had. They had interior shots. I kept looking for his face everywhere that I was in this photograph. I think this might be him over on the right, standing in the middle. He's really tall, kind of lanky, and it looks like him, but I haven't been able to zoom in to see if that's actually him or not. But I like to think it's him at the very, very least. But I get to see what the inside of the interior looks like, what type of tools that they're using, what the shop looks like. Everybody's wearing these cover-ups in cold because it's very cold inside, and that these buildings are kind of an etch-a-sketch sort of tinker toy, not meant to be permanent. So I think that's the other bit too, is that you can kind of see, and that adds to our narrative that we can write about later. Now, I would like to send you, when you're ready, to the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center. Number one, they're super helpful. They're wonderful. They're kind. I've had a wonderful relationship with them for a while now. Go here to request a unit and regimental history. It's completely free, does not cost you anything. Now, why is that important? Well, it will tell me when this unit or regiment was formed. It will tell me the order of commands. It will tell me who's in charge of what. It will tell me what, if my ancestor has a certain rank, what they're responsible for. So all of this will typically come in a PDF. If they don't have this on their site that's readily available, because they do have a growing collection of these, you can still request it. They will give them a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, because they are doing some updates to the site. They will email you the PDF, and it's yours to keep. Doesn't cost anything. So you can have that to your heart's content and say, okay, then if Grandpa Rhodes was under this person, was their immediate supervisor, they would have been working with these 4 people, and this is what they would have been responsible for. So it's a good way to see how your ancestor fits within this tapestry of how this unit or regiment is working. So that's always important. Now, the National World War I Museum and Memorial in Kansas City is amazing. Their staff is exceptionally knowledgeable, and they spent a lot of their time during COVID, when a lot of things were shut down, digitizing a lot of their collections. And it's not just random items either. It's letters, it's postcards, it's photographs. So if they haven't digitized it, you can request it. They will send you a copy for free. So I needed a set of letters from somebody who was in another unit, the regiment, Grandpa Rhodes's unit, Group A, so that they were going in the same place, the same time, but his letters were preserved in the museum archive. So I was able to get them and say, okay, they arrived from this day, they went here on this location. I was using somebody else's letter, but I'm able to get that knowing, Grandpa Rhodes is sitting right next to him. So, or as I'm imagining in my head, but he's still moving with them. He's not on a special duty. So if somebody else is providing that narrative, it's okay to jump on that narrative train and use that the people hawking things were pushy, or that the girls were kissing everybody. It doesn't really matter. But all of that detail you can possibly get from the records and resources that are available at the Museum Memorial in Kansas City. Now, another place to go, though this is a little bit after the war, so the American Legion Digital Archive, all of their newsletters from 1919 onward have been fully digitized, and they're searchable. They're available as PDFs, so they'll bring up each individual year as a PDF, and it's searchable by date, author, title, and subject. So you can look within the archive itself and try to find individual names. So these are free, doesn't cost anything. And if you're trying to find reunions, they'll also have, hey, do you remember when? Or buddies in distress is another one. They'll have all sorts of items like, we haven't heard from so-and-so in a while. Does anybody know where they are? It's a good way to track down ancestors and possibly what they're doing with their American Legion post. So I always like to point that one out because it's free. And remember that the Women's Overseas Service League was founded for female veterans, but it also included women who served with the armed forces in a support capacity. So the YMCA, the YWCA, Red Cross, Salvation Army, Jewish Welfare Board, the American Fund for French Wounded, they were part of this organization. Women were welcomed into this organization because they understood that the value of a woman's contribution should be just as valid as a man's. So their archive is not online, but they do have an oral history database. And I hope to see more archives of this go online soon, because this was a fantastic way for women to support other women, specifically after the war. They were ones who were really fighting to get women to have the same types of benefits and the same type of recognition, especially when it came to things like hospital care and medical care after the war. So let's run through non-combatant records for those other roles, because I don't want this to scare you. So we're moving away from military stuff into more of those support roles, which is often the most underutilized and under-researched part of this whole pie. These are records you can find right now, and I'm going to run through at least the two big ones, okay? But I do want to talk about that some of these are on Ancestry and Fold 3. Some of them are at the National Archives. Some of them are on Family Search, Google Books, Internet Archive, Half-Day Trust. So you guys are kind of seeing that there's a major food group here of just what's readily available online. Now, the things like the World War I Mother's Pilgrimage in 1929, there were multiple pilgrimages of World War I's mothers and widows who had lost their loved ones in the war and had the ability to go and pay their respects in person. However, the records for 1929 are online. The other ones are not yet, but they're still there. The American Protective League was an organization of typically middle or upper middle class men. Think about your Chamber of Commerce, Rotary sort of guys, who by their own, with their own money, work together to help the FBI investigate types of crimes. I'm going to say crimes. Crimes is a very subjective word, but to help investigate things that would support the war effort. So whether it was somebody, remember that we have a suspension of free speech during the First World War. So you could not talk smack about the government. You couldn't talk smack about Wilson. You couldn't talk smack about how you disagreed with the war. That could get you thrown in jail. Eugene Debs ran for president from prison. He was serving a 10-year prison sentence. He only served 3 years. But the American Protective League, the FBI kind of leaned in on what the American Protective League could do, and they would kind of run around and do some of the lighter footwork. Their cards and registers of members are available on Ancestry, but there's more correspondence and newsletters that are also available online. So at the very, very low level, that's what we have. But what might interest you are things like the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution. But I am going to talk really quick about passport applications, because this is one of the best and most robust record sets you can use right now to find a non-combatant ancestor, specifically if they're going abroad to render service. For a very brief period of time, from 1918 to about 1921, you were required to have a passport to enter and exit the United States. We would not do that again until 1941. So during this very, very brief time period, we have all of these aid workers, all of these social workers, canteen workers, entertainers, doesn't matter, who didn't have a passport. And they had to either apply for one before they left or have an emergency passport processed on their behalf so they could have the passport to exit the United States and then enter the United States. And I've got an example of some of the letters that go with Mary Humphrey, who was a social worker to work with orphan children for the American Fund of the French Wounded. So it includes her name, her photograph, and then all of her personal details. So we're able to find a lot about where she's going and the social work she's performing from her passport. Now, how about for those Daughters of the American Revolution records, which it sounds enticing. And I know some people are like, I'm not sure about the Daughters of the American Revolution. Really, during the First World War, the Women's Committee, National Council of Defense, organized women's groups, organizations to get together and to provide essential war relief work on multiple levels. And the Daughters of the American Revolution, typically every year, they would have a state chapter conference to which every individual chapter would have to write out all of the things they did that year and submit them to the state. The state that would take them, publish them, and they were available. Many of these are going online. They're on Internet Archive, they're on Half-Day Trust, they're on Google Books. And what's great is that if you know what chapter your ancestor was in, you're able to see the type of war relief work that they were performing, from knitting garments and raising money for the YMCA, or maybe they're doing things like raising funds for other types of charitable contributions, whether that's we're going to buy a certain amount of of material to ship to individual people, or we're going to raise money to be able to host an event. Whatever that possibly is, you can find this. So this is just for the Alexander Macomb chapter in Mount Clemens, Michigan. This is just the 2 pages of what they did for war relief work. And they were a small chapter, only about 23 people. So you can see all of the things that they were doing. So this is really great to see what women are able to contribute, even from home, even if they have small children. These are the types of things that they're able to contribute to the war effort. Now, it might be online, and I did put this as it might be online to consult the guide, because the guide was dropped into the chat. I will do it again at the end of the session. Some of these things for state and local records, for military discharges, military service statement cards, veterans bonus applications, veteran censuses, they may be online depending on your state. In the guide, I have a state-by-state chapter, which doesn't have everything, but it has as many of the online resources as I could find. When I tell you that I had a very, very small personal life while I was making this book, it is very evident if you go through the state section of this guide, because I try to find as many things as possible and to provide information if it's not online where you can find it. The other bit too are things like non-combatant records. So the Women's Committee for the Council of National Defense, they have some registration cards online. They have some annual reports. That's also listed in the book in its own chapter, as well as Red Cross chapter of Red Cross information. That's also listed in a chapter in the book. So because those are on local and state levels, I can't call every single county trying to figure out what they have, but I am trying to find as much for you online as possible and then give you information about where to go from there. Now, because I'm sitting at 6:52 and we did start online, I'm very pleased I ran through that in less than 55 minutes. So as a reminder, the National World War I Memorial in DC, the first illumination is Friday, next Friday, September 13th at 7:15 Eastern Time, which is 6:15 for you Central Time viewers. So it is available on a live stream. So if you're not going to be in DC for this, please watch the live stream. I think it's going to be really, really fun. And with that, I am going to take your questions. And I am going to go through the chat as well, and I'm going to put the guide in the chat one more time, just in case anybody doesn't have it. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. So thank you for your time, everybody. I appreciate you. And let's go to Q&A. Maria, is there a handout? Yes, I just posted the handout, Maria, so you're perfectly fine. Okay. Babette says, hello, Babette. I found my grandfather in and out to France, and each listing listed a Ruth and his wife, and he listed May as his wife. My brick wall is who is the wife. I think that's an interesting bit, Babette. There might be some additional information there. There's always possibility of a typo. There's always a possibility that the information, they might have used a middle name, which is entirely possible as well. So I think that if we're looking at this, if you're really having that problem and you're not finding it in a draft card, as far as who their next of kin is in the draft card, there might be other things like those veterans censuses. The veterans bonus applications will typically list the wife. So if that's available on a state level, I would highly advocate that. If you don't find it, just email me and I'll do a little digging for you. That's not a problem. But yes, it's okay to be confused, because sometimes people do not transcribe things or provide information the way we want them. Let's be open to the idea that sometimes people do not spell things correctly, that a middle initial is just a typo. And it's okay that it doesn't always match. Just make sure that what you're looking for, it's okay to have a misspelling here or there. If the rest of the information, if it's walking like a duck, quacking like a duck, smelling like a duck, I think that you could make a reasonable argument that this is what we're looking for. All right. Thank you, Marla, thank you so much for attending the presentation. I appreciate your kind feedback. Really, really do. Angela says, I have 2 great uncles who received a Serbian award. Oh, that's cool. The Order of St. Salva. I can't find information on it, and I don't think many were awarded. Where can I find this? Angela, I don't know. There were a lot of countries that distributed those awards. Like, I know people think about the Croix de Guerre, for example, for France. But yes, the Serbians, the Italians, they were giving out a lot of different awards. I do not know the answer to that, but I am intrigued. I would say, Angela, that this would be my shoot from the hip recommendation. that to contact the World War One museum and monument in Kansas City. And I would, their researchers there are retired military guys. They are in it to win it. And I know that based on their other type of military information, they probably would be able to give you not only more information about how it was rewarded, when it was awarded, but also the circumstances of why or how they may have gotten it. So I would refer you to the World War One museum and monument, Angela. I think that would be a good place to go. And when you do find that out, let me know, because that sounds dope. Saint Sava. I like that a lot. Okay, so everybody's got a copy of the handout. I have 22 happy people who were here, so I appreciate you. And I know, oh, thank you, Angela. I'm super happy that you're happy. So if there's any other presentation, super excited that you're here. Really, really want to give you that confidence, friends. I want to give you the confidence. You can do this, all right? So if you have any questions, problems, concerns, email me directly. You have my email address. You know how to get a hold of me. And I hope to hear about your victories. We love a good victory. Write it down, send it off to the World War I Centennial Commission to make sure there's stories of service, make sure it's saved in perpetuity, because I don't want your hard work going to waste, all right? We're going to do this. We want to get ready for the people who are going to be there to celebrate the 150 and the 200. Everything that you do makes somebody else's life easier. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording, and I'm going to wish all of our friends a really good evening and have a good night.